there is belief, and then there is skepticism. And between those two lies a vast territory of questions and the unknown. But what if reality is far more complex than we've been willing to perceive? And what if the stories that we dismiss as myth and legend hold the keys to understanding consciousness? From ghostly encounters to mysterious lights in the sky, humanity has always sensed there was something more out there. Some call it the paranormal, and others call it the divine. Some search the stars for answers, while others look within. They are all connected, threads in the grand tapestry of life. But we stand at a place where the fabric between realities is much thinner than you might think, because this is Crossroads of the Veil. Welcome to Crossroads of the Veil. We are descending into a place you can't find on any map. We travel not to a crumbling castle or a forgotten temple deep in the jungle. Our journey takes us into a land far more mysterious and infinitely more terrifying, the landscape of the human soul. Our destination is not a place, but a state of being. It is an experience so earth-shattering and so deeply painful that mystics and saints have only whispered about it for centuries. It is a passage through absolute suffocating blackness, a trial by an invisible fire. It is a spiritual furnace known by a name that sends a shiver down the spine, the dark night of the soul. What is this strange and frightening thing? Is it just a beautiful, old-fashioned way to describe depression? Is it a crisis of faith dressed up in fancy medieval words? Or is it something more real, something more deliberate? Could it be a genuine stage of spiritual growth, a process that can be mapped out? Is it a terrifyingly real journey, started by a force beyond our understanding? A force that wants to strip a person down to their absolute core. Does it seek to burn away everything they thought they were, only to rebuild them into something entirely new, something different? This is the great mystery we are investigating tonight. Our main piece of evidence, our only guide through this dangerous country, is a small but powerful book. It is also called Dark Night of the Soul, and it was written in the 16th century by a Spanish mystic, a gifted poet, and a lonely prisoner, St. John of the Cross. To understand the map he left behind, we must first get to know the man who drew it. Picture Spain in the late 1500s. It was a time of incredible power and passionate religious belief, a faith that was often brutal. The Spanish Inquisition was a force to be feared, and the Catholic Church was in the middle of a huge internal struggle, a movement called the Counter-Reformation. Inside the Carmelite order of priests and nuns, a storm was gathering. A determined reformer, the brilliant and tough Teresa of Avila, was trying to bring the order back to a simpler way of life. She wanted more prayer, less comfort, and a more disciplined existence. Her followers came to be known as the Discalced, which means shoeless Carmelites. Her greatest supporter, her closest friend, and the brilliant mind behind her movement was a small, quiet man named Juan de Yepes Alvarez. The world would later know him as John of the Cross, but change is never welcomed by those who are comfortable and powerful. In the cold winter of 1577, the fight inside the Carmelite order turned violent. John was ambushed by his own Carmelite brothers, the ones who hated the reforms. He was kidnapped, dragged away, and taken to their monastery in the city of Toledo. There they called him a rebel and a traitor to his own order. They threw him into a place that could only be called a dungeon. This was not a simple room for a monk to pray in. It was a punishment cell. Old stories describe it as a tiny stone room, maybe 6 feet wide and 10 feet long. It had once been used as a toilet. The cell was freezing cold, offering no protection from the harsh Spanish winter. It had no window except for a small slit high up in the wall. It was too high to see out of, and it only let in a sliver of harsh light for a few minutes each day. That little bit of light was just enough to show how deep and suffocating the darkness truly was. Here, in this cold, cramped, and stinking blackness, John was kept for 9 terrible months. He was given only bread and water to survive, with a few sardines now and then. He was regularly and ritually whipped. His brothers would drag him out in front of the whole community to be scourged, his back becoming raw and bloody, as a punishment for his refusal to give up. He was completely alone, abandoned by the world, and locked away by his own spiritual family. It was a state of total loss. Physically, emotionally, and spiritually, he had been thrown into a bottomless pit. And it was here, in the heart of this very real dark night, that the idea for his most famous work was born. He started creating poems in his mind. They were not verses of sadness or despair. They were verses about a mysterious, powerful love that went beyond his suffering. These poems would become the blueprint for his guide into the spiritual darkness. He tells a story of a soul, a lover, who slips out of its house on a dark night. The soul is kindled in love with yearnings, seeking a secret meeting with the one it loves. This is where our investigation begins. This book was not written in a comfortable library or a peaceful garden. It was born from trauma, from being locked away, from having everything taken from him. John wasn't just thinking about a dark night, he was living inside of one. And what he describes is a process that doesn't start with darkness. It starts with a light that can fool you. It begins with the stage of the beginner on the spiritual path. Let's be very clear about what he means by a beginner. This is not someone who is lazy or uninterested in spiritual things. It's the exact opposite. St. John describes a person who has definitively converted to the service of God. This is the person who has had a powerful awakening. They feel like they have finally found their purpose. They have stopped their bad habits and they have started meditating or praying every day. They are reading all the spiritual books they can find. They are filled with a burning, intense passion. In our modern world, we see this pattern everywhere. It's the person who just discovered a new philosophy that changed their life. It's the person who found a new diet or a new workout plan and can't stop talking about it. It's the person who has found a new political cause that they believe in with all their heart. They are on fire. Their excitement seems to have no limits, and it can be inspiring to be around them. St. John uses a beautiful and powerful comparison. He says that God, at this early stage, treats the soul like a loving mother treats her newborn baby. The mother warms it with the heat of her bosom and nurtures it with sweet milk and soft and pleasant food, and carries it and caresses it in her arms. Spiritually, this feels like an experience of deep sweetness and comfort. Prayer is easy. It can even feel like pure bliss. The soul might spend hours, or even whole nights, lost in meditation, and feel nothing but joy. Fasts and other hard practices, things that once seemed impossible, now feel good. There is a real sense of connection to the divine. It feels like the universe is smiling down on you, that you are on the right path and that God is close by, comforting you. This first stage is a gift. It's a grace. It is the spiritual honeymoon period. It is necessary to help draw the soul away from its old connections to worldly things. The sweetness of the spiritual life makes the boring or bitter taste of worldly pleasures seem weak in comparison. It gives the soul the strength it needs to make that first break and to change the direction of its life. But right here, at the very start of the journey, a hidden danger is waiting. A subtle poison begins to mix with the sweet milk. The soul, which is still weak and not yet mature, begins to develop many flaws. These flaws don't come from a bad heart, but from a deep spiritual immaturity. And the first and most dangerous of these flaws, the main doorway to illusion, is a secret kind of pride. This isn't the loud, arrogant pride of someone who thinks they are better than everyone else. It is a quiet, sneaky, and dangerous thing. It whispers to you. It grows from the very success the soul is having. Because everything is going so well, because the feelings of comfort and joy are flowing so easily, the beginner starts to feel a quiet satisfaction. They are not just satisfied with their spiritual path, but with themselves. They become very pleased with their own spiritual actions, with their own progress. They look at their prayer schedule, their acts of kindness, their new spiritual insights, and a little voice inside says, "You're doing great. Look how far you've come. Look how spiritual you are." From this secret satisfaction, a new desire is born. It is the desire to be seen by others as spiritual. The beginner might start dropping hints about their amazing meditation experiences into everyday conversations. They might feel the urge not to learn from others, but to teach others. They start to look at people who are not on the same spiritual path, or who don't seem to be as devoted as they are, and they judge them. Silently, in their own hearts, they look down on them. They might not say it out loud, but the feeling is there, a sense of being better than others. They might even find themselves, as St. John says, acting like the Pharisee in the famous parable. The Pharisee stood in the temple and thanked God that he was not like other men while looking down on the humble tax collector who could only beat his chest and ask for mercy. This is a serious weakness. St. John warns that the devil, and we can think of this as the forces of the ego, of selfishness, of illusion, often uses this weakness. The devil will actually increase the beginner's passion. It will add fuel to the fire, encouraging them to do more spiritual works, to pray more, to show more devotion on the outside. All of this is done to feed that growing pride and arrogance. The ego knows that holy actions, when they are poisoned by pride, become spiritually worthless. They become bad habits disguised as good ones. Some people who are caught in this trap become so spiritually arrogant that they can't stand to see anyone else being seen as good. They become critics and gossips, always pointing out the tiny speck of dust in their brother's eye while ignoring the massive wooden beam in their own. They get worked up over another person's small mistake while swallowing the camel of their own monstrous pride. This pride also poisons their relationship with spiritual guides or teachers. If a spiritual director, a mentor, or a leader doesn't approve of their spiritual state, if they challenge their experiences or question their methods, the beginner's first reaction is not humility. It is anger. They consider that they do not understand them, writes St. John, or that because they do not approve of this and comply with that, their confessors are themselves not spiritual. The ego's defense is to say that the person offering the criticism is wrong. So they go spiritual shopping. They look for a new teacher, a new group, or a new community that will praise them and respect them, a group that will confirm their self-image as a spiritual expert. They run away from anyone who would try to show them their illusions, from anyone who would try to lead them onto a safer, more humble path. Sometimes they even start to feel a deep anger and dislike towards those who were only trying to help them. Full of this arrogance, they make big promises and grand plans, but accomplish very little that is truly meaningful. They become attached to the outward signs of their spirituality. They might practice certain pious gestures, sighs, or a holy look on their face. They might even, St. John warns, fall into ecstasies, especially in public places where they can be seen. The ego loves a spiritual performance. These people are pleased when their spiritual states are noticed, and they are often eager for them to be noticed even more. This pride can also show up as a kind of spiritual possessiveness. They may want to be the favorite student of their spiritual guide or guru. This leads to envy and anxiety when other people get attention. It can lead to a lack of honesty when they examine their own conscience. They become embarrassed to admit their sins plainly because they are afraid their guide will think less of them. So they palliate them, which means they water them down, they explain them away, and they make excuses. Their confession becomes an act of defending themselves rather than accusing themselves. Sometimes they will even find a second spiritual guide to whom they tell their biggest mistakes, so that their main guide sees only their good side. This reinforces the false image of their own perfection. They take pleasure in telling others about their good deeds, maybe exaggerating them a little bit. They desire to be thought of as good, when true humility would be to desire that no one think of them as important at all. What happens when a person in this proud state makes a mistake, as everyone eventually does? The reaction is not humble sadness, it is often a mix of shock and anger. They had started to believe they were already a saint, and their mistake shatters that perfect image. They become impatient and angry with themselves, which is just another, more hidden layer of pride. They may beg God to take away their flaws, but their motivation is questionable. Are they doing it for the love of God? Or, as St. John wisely observes, that they may find themselves at peace and may not be troubled by them. It is a desire for comfort, not a desire for true holiness. They do not realize that if their flaws were suddenly taken away, their pride and arrogance would likely grow even more monstrous. This is the picture of the beginner, lost in a light that fools them. They are like the foolish virgins in the parable, who, when their own lamps run out of oil, must go and ask for oil from others. They dislike praising other people, but love to be praised themselves. It is a dangerous and unstable state. St. John is clear. Very few beginners, during this first period of intense passion, do not fall into at least some of these mistakes. But there is another way. There are some people, he says, who act differently. These are the ones who are truly being prepared for the difficult journey ahead. For them, passion and humility are not opposites. They are two sides of the same coin. The more they do for God, the more they feel the huge debt they owe Him, the greater their pleasure in spiritual things. the more they realize that everything they can do is nothing compared to His greatness. So much would they gladly do from charity and love for Him, that all they do seems to them naught. They are so focused on this loving desire that they barely notice what other people are doing, and if they do notice, they are convinced that everyone else is far better than they are. They feel a holy envy, a desire to serve God as well as others do. Because they think so little of themselves, they are anxious for others to think little of them too. They are confused and don't believe it if anyone praises them. They are the opposite of the person who wants to be a teacher. They have a deep desire to be taught by anyone who can help them. They are ready to change their path in an instant if they are told to, because they never assume that they are right. They are happy when others are praised, and only feel sad that they themselves do not serve God as well. They are ashamed to speak of their good deeds, even to their spiritual leaders, because their deeds seem so small and unimportant. They would rather speak of their faults, their sins, their weaknesses. This, St. John says, is the sign of a spirit that is simple, pure, genuine, and very pleasing to God. The Spirit of God lives in these humble souls, helping them to keep their spiritual treasure secret and to cast out their own evil. Grace is given to the humble, and it is denied to the proud. When these humble souls make a mistake, they handle it with humility, with a gentle spirit, and a loving fear of God, always hoping in His mercy. But St. John admits with a kind of serious sadness, souls who start their journey with this level of perfection are very rare. The vast majority of us, when we first set out, are clumsy, driven by our egos, and full of the secret pride we have just explored. And it is for this exact reason that the journey cannot continue in the light. It is for this reason that God must, out of a deep and terrifying love, lead the soul into the dark night. The sweet milk must be taken away. The gentle caresses must stop. The light must be turned into darkness. The first house of the soul, the house of the senses, which was built on the shaky foundation of spiritual pride, must be plunged into a deep and confusing twilight. It must be plunged into darkness so that it can be cleansed, purified, and prepared for what is to come. The journey has barely started, and already the path is leading directly into shadow. The stage is now set. The beginner, full of a burning but imperfect passion, has built a spiritual life on a foundation of sweet feelings and a secret creeping pride. They believe they are climbing a mountain of light, but they are walking towards the edge of a cliff. And now, the force that first guided them with gentle caresses and sweet milk prepares to administer a terrifyingly different kind of medicine. The time has come for the soul to be weaned. The journey now leads into the first of the two great darknesses described by St. John of the Cross, the night of the senses. This transition does not happen overnight. It is a slow, creeping twilight that descends upon the soul. The very things that once brought immense joy and a feeling of spiritual connection begin to turn to ash in the soul's mouth. The sweet spring of meditation, which once flowed with effortless consolation, suddenly runs dry. The soul kneels to pray, expecting the familiar warmth, the comforting sense of God's presence, but it finds nothing. There is only a profound emptiness, a spiritual desert. The mind, which once soared in contemplation, now feels dull and heavy, unable to focus. Trying to meditate feels like trying to squeeze water from a stone. It becomes a frustrating and ultimately a fruitless chore. St. John calls this state aridity. It's a perfect word. The inner landscape becomes a barren wasteland. The soul finds that it gets no pleasure or comfort from the things of God. But, and this is a crucial distinction, it also finds that it gets no pleasure from the things of the world either. The old worldly temptations, the distractions and desires that the soul had worked so hard to leave behind, lose their appeal. The soul is caught in a strange and uncomfortable middle ground. It is suspended between two worlds, and it belongs to neither. It can't go back to its old life, but it seems it can't go forward in its new one either. It is trapped. This is the point where a terrible confusion begins to set in. The beginner who has come to associate spiritual progress with good feelings, with sweetness and light, can only come to one conclusion. They have failed. They must have done something terribly wrong. They start to believe that God has abandoned them, that they have lost their way completely. They look at their spiritual life, which now feels like a hollow shell, and they think, "It is all my fault. I have been lazy. I have been careless. I am no longer worthy." This feeling of failure can be overwhelming. The soul becomes filled with a deep melancholy, a sadness that colors everything. They might try to force themselves back into the old way of feeling. They redouble their efforts. They pray longer. They meditate harder. They try to whip up the old feelings of devotion, but it's no use. The more they try to force it, the more arid and empty the experience becomes. They are like a person lost in quicksand. The more they struggle, the deeper they sink into their own anxiety and despair. Now, an intelligent person listening to this might ask a very important question. How is this any different from simple lukewarmness? How is it different from someone just getting bored with their spiritual practice and becoming lazy? How is it different from what we might today call clinical depression? This is not just a modern question. St. John of the Cross was a brilliant psychologist of the soul, and he understood this danger perfectly. He knew that a person could easily mistake this purifying darkness for a personal failure. So he provides a clear 3-part test, 3 specific signs that tell the soul that it is not lost, but is in fact being led onto a new and more difficult path. These 3 signs are the key to navigating this first dark night. The first sign, as we have already mentioned, is that the soul finds no comfort or pleasure in the things of God. But, and this is the critical part, it also finds no pleasure in any of the things of the world. A person who is just lazy or lukewarm in their spiritual life might stop praying, but they will usually replace that activity with something else they find more entertaining. They will turn to worldly distractions, to hobbies, to gossip, to pleasure-seeking. Their desire has simply shifted from one object to another. But the soul in the night of the senses is different. It doesn't want the world. The thought of its old pleasures leaves it feeling empty or even disgusted. It is trapped in the state of having no appetite for anything, divine or worldly. This is not the sign of a soul that has grown lazy. It is the sign of a soul that is being deliberately starved of its old attachments. The second sign is the one that causes the most pain. The soul is ordinarily left with a deep and nagging worry, a painful awareness that it is not serving God as it should. The person becomes filled with a kind of holy anxiety. They look at their own dryness, their inability to feel God's presence, and it causes them immense distress. They are convinced that they have somehow displeased God, that they have lost Him through their own fault. St. John is very clear here. This feeling of anxiety is the key. If the dryness and emptiness came only from laziness or lukewarmness, the person wouldn't care so much. They would feel a kind of lazy indifference. They wouldn't be tormented by the thought that they are failing God. The very fact that the soul is so pained by its condition is the proof that its desire for God is still alive. In fact, it is stronger than ever. It is just hidden beneath the surface, under the heavy weight of this spiritual aridity. The soul is like a lover who can no longer see the face of the one they love, and the absence is a source of constant gnawing pain. The third and final sign is the most subtle, and it points the way forward. The soul finds that it can no longer meditate or reason things out in prayer as it did before. The discursive mind, the part of the mind that thinks in words and concepts and images, becomes useless in prayer. It's as if a door has been shut. Any attempt to use the imagination or the intellect to connect with God leads only to frustration. However, at the same time, the soul is often drawn to a new way of being with God. It finds a quiet inclination to simply remain in a state of loving attentiveness, a general peaceful awareness of God's presence, without any specific thoughts or feelings. The soul doesn't want to think about God, it just wants to be with God. This is a critical turning point. The soul is being taught a new language of prayer. It is being led from the busy, active work of meditation to the quiet, receptive state of contemplation. St. John compares meditation to the work of a child who must get up and walk to its mother's breast to receive milk. Contemplation, on the other hand, is like the state where the mother holds the child to her breast, and the child has nothing to do but receive the nourishment that is given to it. The soul in the night of the senses is being asked to stop struggling, to stop thinking so hard, and to simply rest in this quiet, dark, and often empty-feeling presence. For the beginner who is used to being active and in control, this is incredibly difficult. They feel like they are doing nothing, and in a world that values productivity and effort, doing nothing feels like laziness. It feels like failure. Their spiritual directors, if they are not wise, might even make the problem worse. They might tell the person to try harder, to read more, to force themselves to meditate, which only increases their anxiety and frustration. St. John gives very clear advice to those in this state. Let them be quiet and serene, he writes, although it may seem clear to them that they are doing nothing and are losing time, for they will be doing a great deal by simply being quiet and patient. Their only job is to let go of the need to feel something, to achieve something in prayer. Their job is to learn to sit in the darkness, to endure the emptiness, and to trust that a deeper, more secret work is being done in them. What is this secret work? What is the purpose of this painful purification? St. John explains that in the first stage of the spiritual life, the beginner's love for God is deeply connected to their senses and their emotions. They love the feeling of devotion. They love the comfort of prayer. They love the satisfaction of their spiritual progress. But this love is still, in many ways, a love of self. It is a love of their own spiritual experiences. God is, in a way, serving them by giving them these good feelings. The night of the senses is designed to turn this entire relationship upside down. God withdraws the comfort and the sweetness in order to purify the soul's desire. He is teaching the soul to love Him not for His gifts, but for Himself alone. He is teaching the soul to serve Him, not for the reward of feeling good, but out of a pure and selfless love. To do this, he must starve the sensory part of the soul. He must detach the soul from its addiction to spiritual candy. The appetites, the desires of the senses must be put to sleep. They must be plunged into darkness and emptiness so that they lose their power over the soul. This process is a kind of spiritual surgery, and it is painful. The soul feels abandoned. It feels like a patient on an operating table who is fully awake, feeling the surgeon's knife but cannot see what is being done or why. The memory, the intellect, and the will, the three great faculties of the soul, are all thrown into confusion. The memory can no longer recall the sweet feelings of past prayers, which only makes the present emptiness feel even deeper. The intellect can no longer form clear ideas about God. It is lost in a confusing fog, and the will, which wants to love God, finds itself paralyzed, unable to feel anything but this painful emptiness. The soul in this state is tempted in many ways. It is tempted to despair, to believe that this darkness will never end. It is tempted to turn back, to give up the spiritual journey altogether and return to the more predictable comforts of the world. It is tempted by what St. John calls the spirit of fornication, which is not just about physical lust, but about the desire for any kind of cheap comfort, any sensory pleasure that will numb the pain of this spiritual emptiness. It is also tempted by a spirit of anger and impatience. The soul becomes irritable. The joy and sweetness that once made it patient and kind to others is gone, and now it is left with its own raw, unpurified nature. Small annoyances can become sources of intense frustration. This, St. John insists, is a good sign. It shows that the purification is working. The soul is no longer being propped up by the stilts of good feelings. It is being forced to stand on its own 2 feet and to confront its own weaknesses, its own impatience, its own hidden anger. All the imperfections that were hidden beneath the sweet frosting of the beginner's devotion are now being brought out into the open, into the harsh light of self-awareness. And this is a necessary, though deeply humbling, part of the process. The purpose of this first night is to achieve a profound state of self-knowledge. The soul, stripped of all its spiritual consolations, is forced to see itself as it truly is. Weak, imperfect, and utterly dependent on God's grace. It can no longer hide behind the mask of its own spiritual accomplishments. The pride of the beginner is being systematically dismantled. The soul learns that it cannot achieve anything by its own strength. It cannot force God to give it good feelings. It cannot control the spiritual world. It can only surrender. It can only endure. And it can only trust. This dark night is an act of divine love. It is the tough love of the mother who finally takes the sweet milk away from her child, not because she is cruel, but because it is time for the child to learn to eat solid food. It is time for the child to grow up. The soul is being prepared for a deeper, more adult relationship with the divine. It is being prepared for a kind of knowledge that does not come through the senses or the intellect, but is received directly in the center of the soul. But before it can receive this new, more substantial food, its palate must be cleansed. Its addiction to sweetness must be broken. It must learn to endure the night. For most souls, this night of the senses is a long and difficult passage. It can last for a very long time. But for those who persevere, for those who learn to be quiet and to trust in the darkness, a new stage of the journey awaits. They emerge from this first night transformed. They are humbled, they are stronger, and their love is purer. They are no longer spiritual children seeking comfort in candy. They are now what St. John calls proficients, or those who are making progress. They have been tested by the fire of aridity, and they have survived. But the journey is far from over, for they have only passed through the darkness of the outer courtyard of their own being. A deeper, more terrifying, and far more transformative darkness lies ahead, the night of the spirit. The soul has passed through the first fire. It has walked through the dry, barren desert of the night of the senses, and has emerged on the other side, changed. This is the stage of the proficient, the one who is making progress. The violent storms of the appetites and emotions have largely calmed. The soul now enjoys a state of relative peace, a quiet and loving contemplation that is no longer dependent on the sweet feelings of the beginner. Its love for God has been purified of much of its selfishness. It no longer seeks spiritual candy. It has learned to eat the solid food of a more mature faith. From the outside, this person might look like they have arrived. They are often serene, humble, and filled with a quiet strength. They have a deeper understanding of themselves and a more charitable and patient attitude towards others. They have navigated the twilight and now walk in a kind of gentle, peaceful daylight. It is easy for the soul in this state, and for those looking at it, to believe that the journey is mostly over, that this pleasant plateau is the final destination. But this is a dangerous illusion. This period of calm is not the harbor. It is merely the eye of the storm. The soul has been cleansed of its surface-level imperfections, the weeds that grow in the garden of the senses. But the roots of those weeds go far deeper, down into the very soil of the spirit itself. And to purify the spirit, a far more terrifying and profound darkness is required. The journey now leads out of the peaceful daylight and into a blackness so complete, so absolute, that it makes the first night seem like a pleasant shadow. This is the second and final crucible, the dark night of the spirit. If the first night was a stripping away of the soul's attachment to sensory pleasure, this second night is a stripping away of the soul itself. It is a direct, terrifying, and overwhelming encounter with the divine reality. St. John of the Cross uses a powerful and shocking analogy to explain what happens next. He says that God now infuses the soul with his own divine light and wisdom. But for the soul, which is still impure and limited in its nature, this divine light is not experienced as light at all. It is experienced as an impenetrable, painful, and suffocating darkness. He compares it to the sun shining on the eyes of an owl. The sun is pure light, but to the owl, whose eyes are weak and accustomed to the dark, the brilliant light is blinding. It is a painful agony that forces it to hide in the deepest shadows. In the same way, the infinite, pure, and holy reality of God, when it shines directly upon the spirit, does not illuminate it. It overwhelms it. It reveals in horrifying detail the soul's own impurity, its own wretchedness, its own absolute nothingness in comparison to the divine. This is no longer the gentle emptiness of aridity. This is not just the absence of comfort. This is an active, positive, and excruciating torment. The soul feels as if it has been completely and utterly abandoned by God. It is not just that it cannot feel God's presence. It feels with an unshakable and terrifying certainty that God has rejected it, cast it out, and hates it. St. John writes that the soul feels as if God has set it as a mark for his arrows. Every faculty of the soul is plunged into a unique and terrible suffering. The intellect, the part of the mind that understands and makes sense of the world, is plunged into a darkness where it can understand nothing. All its old certainties, its theological knowledge, its neat and tidy beliefs about God are shattered. It tries to think about God and finds only a blank wall, a terrifying void. It feels like an absolute fool, and it becomes convinced that it has lost its mind. The will, the part of the soul that loves and desires, is plunged into an agonizing emptiness. It can no longer feel any love for God or for anyone else. It feels only a profound and terrifying coldness, a spiritual paralysis. It is convinced that it had become incapable of love, that its heart has turned to stone. The soul is tormented by the belief that it has lost the ability to love the very God it so desperately desires. And the memory, instead of being a source of comfort, becomes an instrument of torture. It brings to the soul's attention every mistake, every sin, every failing of its entire life. These are not remembered with a gentle, humble sorrow. They are presented as evidence in a divine courtroom where the soul is the accused, and the verdict is already guilty. The soul sees itself as a filthy, disgusting creature, unworthy of anything but eternal punishment. St. John says the soul feels the shadow of death and the pains of hell. It is a living experience of what it would feel like to be eternally separated from the source of all life and all love. During this time, the soul is also tormented by what St. John calls the three great temptations: impatience, blasphemy, and a profound spiritual confusion. The suffering is so intense and seems so endless that the soul is tempted to a deep and bitter impatience, a kind of anger at its own miserable state. Worse still, horrible and blasphemous thoughts against God may flood the mind. The soul doesn't want these thoughts. They are a source of incredible shame and pain, but it feels powerless to stop them. This only adds to the certainty that it is evil and has been rejected by God. And all of this is wrapped in a fog of utter confusion. The soul simply cannot understand what is happening to it. It has tried to serve God its whole life, and its reward seems to be this absolute torment and abandonment. It feels like a cruel and meaningless joke. What is the purpose of this hellish experience? From the soul's perspective, it feels like punishment, like a final and terrible judgment. But from the perspective of the divine physician, it is the most powerful and purifying medicine. This is the deep surgery of the soul. St. John uses his most famous and brilliant analogy to explain this process: the analogy of the log of wood and the fire. Imagine a log of wood. It is damp, cold, and dark. It has a rough texture and an unpleasant, earthy smell. This log represents the soul in its natural state. Now imagine a great fire. This fire represents the transforming love of God. When you place the log on the fire, it does not instantly burst into a beautiful flame. The first thing that happens is a violent struggle. The fire begins to attack the log. It drives out the moisture, which sizzles and turns to steam. It heats the wood, which begins to smoke and give off a dark, foul-smelling vapor. The log crackles and groans. It turns black and ugly. It seems as if the fire is destroying the log, making it even worse than it was before. This, St. John says, is exactly what is happening in the dark night of the spirit. The fire of divine love is attacking the soul. It is driving out all the deep-seated imperfections, the hidden moisture of pride, the coldness of spiritual sloth, the dark smoke of envy and spiritual gluttony. All the ugly hidden parts of the soul's nature are being brought to the surface and burned away. The soul in this state feels its own ugliness, its own smoke, its own wretchedness more intensely than ever before. It believes it is being destroyed, but in reality, it is being prepared. For what happens to the log if it remains in the fire? After the smoke, after the hissing, after the blackness, a change begins to occur. The log itself begins to glow. It slowly takes on the properties of the fire. It becomes hot, it becomes bright, and finally it bursts into flame. At this point, you can no longer distinguish the log from the fire. It has been transformed into the fire. It is luminous, weightless, and beautiful. It has become, as St. John would say, God by participation. This is the ultimate purpose of the dark night of the spirit. It is a process of total annihilation and total recreation. The old self, the ego with all its hidden attachments and imperfections, must be completely burned away. It must be reduced to ashes. This is a terrifying death. The soul feels like it is ceasing to exist. But it is only through this death that the new transformed self can be born, a self that is so united with the divine that it shares in its very nature. This night is therefore not an abandonment by God, but the most intimate and powerful act of God's love. It is the fierce, uncompromising love of the master sculptor who takes his hammer and chisel to a rough block of marble. The blows are violent. Pieces of the stone are shattered and thrown away. The process is one of destruction, but the sculptor's goal is not to destroy the marble, but to reveal the beautiful statue that is hidden within it. The soul is that block of marble, and the painful blows of the dark night are chipping away everything that is not the divine image. Very few souls are called to pass through this final purifying fire in its full intensity. It is a path for those who are being prepared for the highest state of union with God. It requires immense courage and a faith that is beyond all understanding. a naked faith that clings to God in the darkness, even when it feels nothing but His absence and His anger. The soul in this state can do nothing to help itself. It cannot reason its way out. It cannot feel its way out, and it cannot work its way out. Its only task is to endure, to surrender, and to allow this terrible, loving fire to do its work. It must consent to its own annihilation. It must allow itself to be unmade, so that it can be remade in the image of the divine. The night is at its blackest. The suffering is at its peak, and the soul hangs on a cross of pure spiritual agony. But it is here, in this place of absolute death, that the first faint rays of an unimaginable dawn are about to appear. The log has been consumed by the fire. The marble has endured the final violent blow of the sculptor's chisel. The soul, having been nailed to the cross of its own nothingness, having passed through the absolute zero of spiritual death, now finds itself in a place it could never have imagined. The deepest, most suffocating point of the night is not a prelude to annihilation. It is the very moment before the dawn. And this is not the gentle, familiar daylight the soul knew before. It is a new and brilliant light, a light that does not just illuminate but penetrates and transforms everything it touches. The soul has entered the final stage of the journey, the state of divine union, or what St. John of the Cross in his poetry calls the spiritual marriage. The transition from the torment of the second night to the peace of this union is not a gradual lightening. It is often experienced as a sudden and profound shift. The terrifying feeling of God's anger and rejection vanishes in an instant, replaced by an unshakable and overwhelming certainty of His infinite love. The soul, which felt so foul and wretched, now sees itself bathed in a divine light, and it understands that the very fire that felt like punishment was in fact the most profound and intimate caress of divine love. The darkness was God's secret and powerful way of making the soul ready to receive His own likeness. In this new state, the faculties of the soul, which were once instruments of torture, are now transformed into instruments of divine perception. The intellect, which was plunged into a blind and stupid darkness, is now illuminated by a new kind of knowing. This is not the old way of knowing, which involved thinking, reasoning, and forming concepts. This is a direct, intuitive, and loving awareness of the truth. St. John calls it a divine and loving knowledge. The soul no longer needs to think about God. It knows God through a simple, loving gaze. It perceives the deep truths of existence not as a set of ideas, but as a living reality. It is as if the soul has been given a new sense, a spiritual eye that sees the divine presence flowing through all of creation. It sees the interconnectedness of all things and understands the secret, loving purpose behind everything, even the suffering it just endured. The will, which was frozen in a cold and loveless paralysis, is now set ablaze with a pure and powerful flame. It no longer struggles with its own desires. Its only desire is to love. But this is not the needy, grasping love of the beginner, nor the more controlled, dutiful love of the proficient. This is a love that has been completely united with the love of God. The soul loves with God's own love. It loves everything that God loves, in the way that God loves it. This love is calm, serene, and incredibly powerful. It is a flame that is no longer smoky or wavering, but burns with a pure, steady, and tranquil heat. The soul is no longer trying to love God. It has become a living embodiment of that love. And the memory, which once tormented the soul with its past sins, is now at peace. The soul has been so profoundly cleansed that it is freed from the burden of its past. It lives in a state of serene presence, no longer troubled by guilt or regret. Its attention is not fixed on itself, but on the God with whom it is now united. It moves through the world with a new kind of freedom, a lightness of being that comes from being completely emptied of self and filled with the divine. What is life like for a person who has reached this state? From the outside, they might not seem extraordinary. They do not walk around with a visible halo or perform constant dramatic miracles. The transformation is deep and internal, but there are signs. The primary sign is a profound and unshakable peace, a deep serenity that is not disturbed by the storms and chaos of the outside world. The soul is like a deep ocean. The surface may be troubled by waves, but the depths remain in a state of absolute calm. This person possesses a deep and quiet wisdom. They are not interested in showing off their knowledge or winning arguments. Their wisdom comes from that direct, loving perception of the truth. They often understand the hearts of other people and can speak a word of comfort or guidance that goes directly to the core of a person's suffering. They have a profound humility. Having experienced their own absolute nothingness in the dark night, they have no illusions about their own importance. They know with every fiber of their being that everything they are and everything they have is a pure gift from God. They take no credit for their virtues. They see themselves only as a clean window through which the divine light can shine. Their actions are no longer driven by anxiety, ambition, or the desire for reward. They act out of a simple, overflowing love. St. John says that all the works of such a soul are done in God and with God. There is no longer a sense of I am doing this for God. The distinction between the soul and God has, in a mysterious way, dissolved. The soul has become a perfect instrument, a finely tuned guitar in the hands of the divine musician. It moves and acts in the world, but it is God who is the true source of its life and its actions. This is the ultimate destination of the journey St. John of the Cross has mapped for us. It begins with the beginner, who loves God with a passionate but selfish love, like a child who loves its mother for her sweet milk and warm embrace. Then comes the first test, the night of the senses, where God, like a loving mother, weans the child from the milk of sensory comfort, teaching it to eat the more solid food of faith. The soul emerges as a proficient, more mature, but still limited by the deep, hidden imperfections of the spirit. This leads to the final, terrifying crucible, the night of the spirit, where the loving fire of God purges the soul to its very roots, burning away the old self completely. This is the death that leads to a new life, a resurrection into the state of divine union, where the soul, like the log transformed into fire, now shares in the very nature of the God it loves. It is moved from self-love to a love of God for his gifts, and finally to a love of God for himself alone, a love so pure that the two have become one. The journey through the dark night is a radical re-envisioning of what the spiritual life is all about. In our modern world, we are often taught to seek the light, to think positive thoughts, to fill ourselves with spiritual knowledge and blissful experiences. St. John of the Cross presents us with a terrifying and paradoxical alternative. He tells us that the truest path to the light is not by running towards the light, but by having the courage to walk into the darkness. It is a path not of addition, but of subtraction. It is not about becoming more, but about becoming less, until nothing is left but the pure, empty space where the divine can finally enter and make its home. The map St. John left for us was not written in a comfortable study. It was born in the darkness of a prison cell, from the heart of a man who was abandoned, tortured, and stripped of everything. He did not just describe the dark night, he lived it, and his message is one of profound and difficult hope. It tells us that our moments of greatest spiritual dryness, our deepest confusion, our most painful experiences of abandonment and despair, are not necessarily signs that we have failed or that God has left us. They may, in fact, be the signs that we are being loved with a love so powerful and so pure that it must first destroy us in order to remake us. It is the love of the divine surgeon, who knows that to heal the disease, he must first use the painful fire of the cauterizing iron. The path is not for everyone, but the questions it raises are for all of us. When we feel that our spiritual life has run dry, when prayer becomes a chore and our old beliefs no longer bring us comfort, is it possible that we are being invited into a deeper, more adult faith? When we experience a profound crisis, a loss that strips away our sense of identity and leaves us feeling empty and alone, is it possible that the deep ground of our own being is trying to wean us from the sweet but ultimately unsatisfying milk of our worldly consolations? The final thought-provoking question that St. John of the Cross leaves us with is not about the darkness, but about the dawn that follows. What does it mean for a human soul to be united with God, to become, as he says, God by participation? What does it mean for our faculties to become divine? This is not an endpoint, a happily ever after. It is an entry into a new and unknown horizon of being, a way of living and perceiving reality that is as different from our normal state as waking is from dreaming. The journey into the dark night is a journey of ultimate trust. It is the willingness to let go of everything you think you know, everything you think you are, and to walk into an absolute darkness, guided only by a secret burning love. The path is terrifying. The experience feels like annihilation. But the promise for those who persevere is not just a return to the light. It is the promise of becoming light itself. The map is before you. The path leads into shadow. The rest of the journey, as it is for every soul, must be made in secret and alone. This has been Crossroads of the Veil. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, keep your eyes and your mind open. As we step back from the crossroads, remember the story doesn't end here, because this is just the beginning, searching for the knowledge and wisdom to unravel the mysteries of our universe. Unexplained sightings, spirits, and science. They are all connected in the grand tapestry of life. So remember, keep pulling at the threads, because this has been Crossroads of the Veil.